So as always, before you get an exam, I'm going to give you some ideas of what's going to be on there, okay, what kind of things are going to be in the multiple choice, what kind of things are going to be in the written response, okay, how many questions, all of that kind of stuff, okay. So obviously it's going to be the same format as your first unit exam. There are some multiple choice questions and there are some written response questions. It's a bit different though in that the written response questions for the chemistry exam were all skills, right? Because balance an equation, predict the products, do a mole equation calculation, it was all skill stuff, okay? There's not as much of that, obviously, in biology. It's more of apply what you've learned, and that's what most of the written response will be, okay? They're going to be situational questions, okay, about the topics we have gone over, like cell transport, okay, transport in plants, the importance of multicellularity and specialization, compartmentalization, the limits of diffusion, plant hormones, okay, plant growth and development, all of that kind of stuff is going to be placed in the written response in situational type questions. So I show you a picture of a plant and I say, this plant has been in this pot for 8 weeks, its light source is over to the left, why does it look like this? Okay, and you would have to, okay, so plants generally grow towards the light, and this plant's growing that way, Phototropism, toxins, native plants, okay, like you have to think of all of that stuff and apply it to that situation. You everyone kind of follow? Okay, there's a lot of that in the written response. Okay, in fact, pretty much all of it is that kind of stuff. Okay, there's a lot of diagrams on this test with both the multiple choice and the written response. It's photocopied in color, right, so that you can see all of the things clearly. All right, so that's it. Here's the stuff. Okay, first thing we went over, cell theory. Okay. There were only 4 people who were really important. Okay, Hooke, because he did what? Yeah, he discovered cells and made the most important tool in biology. Okay, the microscope. All right. Then we had Leeuwenhoek. Okay, Leeuwenhoek was the first person to view living cells. Yeah. Okay, and he saw that they moved. They weren't empty little rooms. Okay, they could divide and reproduce. He discovered a lot of important things. Okay. And then we had Schleiden and Schwann, okay, and they were the two that came up with the cell theory. Okay, first point is all organisms are made of cells. Cells carry out the basic functions of the organism, and cells reproduce by splitting in half or dividing. Okay, so they were important in that they came up with that original cell theory. Now, we said several times throughout this unit, okay, that our main focus with the cell theory is the second point of the cell theory. Cells carry out the basic functions of an organism. Okay? In order to do that, they have to have certain structures, okay? Those organelles that we find in all eukaryotic cells. Some we don't find in all eukaryotic cells, some we find only in certain modes of nutrition. So back to the cell anatomy lab and your analysis question there. There's definitely going to be a way to work in that cells carry out the basic functions of an organism, working that into a lot of answers in the written response. Okay. All right, so that's what we need to know about the cell theory. There's some multiple choice questions, obviously. That's where you'd find the stuff about Hooke and Leeuwenhoek and Schleiden and Schwann. Okay, the written response part, okay, again, working in that second point of the cell theory into several questions. Okay, then looking at size estimation and microscopy. There could very easily be a question where you have a picture and I've drawn a circle on the picture and I'll ask you to estimate the size of an object if that magnification is, let's say, 400 times and the field of view is 400 micrometers, okay, just like if you were looking through your high-powered lens, okay, you have to show me, hey, Mr. Critter, I can still estimate the size of an object. I expected there might be something like that on there. There could also be questions about lab drawings, okay, like the format of them. Obviously, I'm not going to make you do one, okay, but I could easily put one on there and ask you maybe what's wrong with it, okay, or something along those lines. And there could be a few things in the multiple choice about microscopy as well, like what lens do we start with and things like that. Okay, so there's definitely going to be a few things on the use of the microscope. You will not have to label the diagram of the microscope, okay, because As long as you can use it, I don't really care whether you know what everything's called. Okay? That turning thing, the thing you look through, all of that. So. Okay, modes of nutrition. You got to know those. Okay, there could be some multiple choice stuff about those, but it's also something you could work into some of the written response items. Okay, when you're talking about specialization, multicellular organisms, looking at modes of nutrition is probably something you can work into some of your answers, knowing what a chemoheterotroph and a photoautotroph are, and how the structure of their cells differ. Why? Okay. That could be in both parts, but it's probably primarily going to be in the multiple choice. Now, cell structure. How many times were you asked to label a diagram of a cell? Yeah, a few times. 3 times, actually. Okay? Yeah, you're going to be asked to do that one more time. Not the whole thing, because obviously that's not an effective use of time, but you're definitely going to have a diagram of a cell in your unit exam, and you're going to have to label and give the functions of whatever structures I take. Okay, so cell structure, that's what we just talked about, labeling, okay, compartmentalization, okay, and also note the difference. We talked just briefly about it, but the difference between a eukaryotic cell, those are the ones that have compartmentalization, okay, and a prokaryotic cell, those that don't, okay, bacteria and things like that. Okay. Should definitely know what compartmentalization is, okay, because without it, there can be no specialization. There can be no multicellularity. And if we don't have those compartments, then we can't have the other two things. Okay, cell transport. What are the big three? Diffusion, osmosis, active transport. There is at least one written response question on each. At least. Okay. There's probably a way to work cell transport into several more of those questions. Okay. But there will definitely be one each on those. So be ready for those. Be able to identify, if I give you a situation, what type of cell transport is occurring in that question. And talk about it. And talk about how it applies or how it's going to work in that situation. Okay, so if the question is talking about the movement of just water across a membrane, what are we looking at? Osmosis. Okay, if it's talking about moving anything from one place to another in the cell, it's talking about diffusion. If it's talking about using energy to move things across the membrane, it's right. You just got to be able to identify those key points. Will be in there. Okay, but remember, if you're talking about these things, you want to be as detailed as possible. All right, we talked about how active transport requires those special transport or carrier proteins in order for it to help change the shape of the membrane and make things work. Okay, things like that. Just little details like that are the kind of the difference between getting 4 out of 5 and 5 out of 5 on a question about cell transport. Okay, be detailed, be thorough. All right, so diffusion. Okay, got to know about that. Got to know about osmosis. Okay, active transport. Even wrote on their carrier and transport proteins. Okay, that's going to be an important part of that question. Now, with diffusion, did we talk about how it's got a lot of positives, but it's also got some negatives? Yeah, there's probably going to be a question about that. Right? Probably going to be a question kind of related to your cell size activity with cubes. Okay, there'll be something in there along those lines about the limits of diffusion, how that might influence the size of the cell, okay, and things like that. Because we did do an activity on that. It was a pretty important concept. Surface area to volume ratios and things like that, okay, are going to be important in that regard. And I think that's what I had. Yeah, it was next. Okay, so multicellularity. What is your best example in your notes about multicellular organisms? The leaf. Yeah, the layers of the leaf. Okay, that shows us a multicellular organism that has specialization. The cells in the leaf are not all the same. They all do a different job, so they all have different structure. Okay, that structure helps them to do a specific job. They still all carry out the basic functions of the organism, but they also do something better than the other cells do. Right? So important to talk about those, okay? And definitely talk about the question may even be about the layers of the leaf. If it's not, then talk about the layers of the leaf, because that's the best example you have. Okay, so advantages of specialization. It overcame this problem. Okay, multicellularity and specialization overcame the problem of a big cell not being able to transport materials. Okay? It allowed organisms to get larger without having this problem related to diffusion through large cells. Okay? That was its major advantage. Specialization is another major advantage because it allows things to be done more efficiently. Okay, so definitely go over your notes on lesson 11 on multicellularity. There's lots of stuff in there that you can work into the answer about multicellularity, the question, about multicellularity and specialization. Okay, examples of specialization in plants. We just talked about that. I got ahead of myself. Okay, so that's layers of the leaf. Okay, and then we talked about transport in plants. Okay, we did a lab on that. Could be some stuff about the lab, maybe. Okay. So you're going to need to be able to explain in detail how water and sugar are transported within the plants. Okay, talking about osmosis and the polar nature of water, and the xylem and the phloem and all of that stuff. Use those terms. Okay, be specific when you are explaining these things. Okay, and again, it could be an application type of question, like I plant a potato plant under these conditions, how might that affect its ability to transport water? Okay, or something along those lines. Okay, and you can see it apply, and then I've underlined it like a couple of times. I think I've said a few times now today that most of the questions in the written response are apply your knowledge kind of questions. Okay, parts of a plant. Okay, know the phloem and xylem, know the leaves, know the stem, the roots, and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, you definitely need to know those, not because I'm going to put a picture of a plant and go label this, okay, because I'm not. But you certainly need to know the role of each part. That could be multiple choice type stuff. Okay, forces involved, okay, something important as well. Okay, plant growth, development, and adaptation. So talking about, the plant hormones. Okay, there could definitely be some multiple choice questions about plant hormones. There could also be some use for those when you're applying your knowledge to a question about plant growth in the written response. Okay, so knowing phototropism, geotropism, thigmotropism, what hormones are most involved in those, okay? But even more than that, the mechanism by which tropisms happen. Okay? If a plant is going to grow and bend, what does it need to be able to do? What does it have to do to one side? Okay, it's going to have what? Right, elongation of the cells on one side. In other words, one side needs to grow faster than the other. That's what will cause the plant to bend. Remember, we said auxins are the main hormone responsible for that. Okay, again, the difference between getting like 2 out of 5 on a question and 5 out of 5 on a question is talking about that. If you just say, hey, this plant is growing towards the sun, that's phototropism, that's 2 marks. Okay, you tell me it's phototropism, it's growing towards the sun, it does this by using auxins to one side of the plant, making the other side grow faster than the other, suddenly there's 3 more marks. Okay? Make sure your answer tells me what you know. Okay? You can't keep that stuff in your head. Right? People always do that. Well, I knew that. I'm sure you did, but I can only mark what you write down, not what I hope you know. Okay? So you have to make sure you show all of that.
Do all plants have phototropism because they all grow upward? There's no conditions, which is towards the sun.
Towards the sun, yeah.
So every single plant has phototropism.
Yes. Yeah, phototropism is the primary mode of growth. Okay, geotropism will also lead them to grow upwards if they're shaded. Okay, so hormones, tropisms, adapt to the environment. That's what we just talked about there. Okay, so make sure you know that. And then Okay, factors affecting plant growth, biotic, abiotic components. Okay. Talked about that just last week. Okay, so just going to give you some details here about the test. So there are 26 multiple choice questions. There are 9 written response questions, so less multiple choice and more written. Okay, so in the written response, again, we're looking at like plants, regulation of water loss. Okay, how does a plant, control how much water is being lost from the plant? You can probably work in some stuff about plant transport in there as well. Okay, an application question about plant growth, cell diagram, multicellularity and specialization, plant transports, cell transport, plant growth and development, cell transport. Okay, that's looking at the written response, and then, like you say, the multiple choice is a lot more kind of read and regurgitate kind of stuff. Okay, but again, there's diagrams. Not as many in the multiple choice, a lot more in the written. Be ready for all of those. If I bothered to put a diagram next to a question, you can bet it was important, and you should look at it carefully, okay? Because it's probably got some tips or hints for you to use. Okay, questions from you guys? Anything you want me to go over in a little more detail? Okay. Then I would suggest you probably start looking at the review package I posted in Google Classroom like over a week ago now. Okay, I'll pull that up so you can see it. I'd suggest maybe getting started on that.
Okay.